Hello everyone, welcome to the StreetLight webinar series. Today, we will be discussing the home and work location analysis. I'm Joanne, your host for today, and I'm joined by Teresa, Tapia, and Matt Pettit. Teresa is StreetLight's Customer Success Manager for the West Coast, where she works to help transportation agencies use StreetLight data for their everyday analytics. Matt is StreetLight Solution Engineer in the Southeast and has lived in Atlanta for 4 years successfully without a car. Before we begin, some housekeeping items. At the end of this presentation, you can expect to get Teresa and Matt's contact, information about StreetLight's newly launched community forum, information on where to download the case study for topics Teresa and Matt are presenting. Our agenda for today. First, I will give a brief overview of StreetLight data and the home and work location analytics. Teresa will share her experience utilizing home and work location to analyze visitors to Golden Gate Park Tennis Court in San Francisco, California. Matt will share his experience using home and work locations for a potential congestion pricing study in Atlanta. Lastly, we will spend the last few minutes asking our experts, Teresa and Matt, for their best practices and thoughts around the home and work location analytics topic. StreetLight provides mobility data analytics through our online web platform called StreetLight Insights to help you iterate and put data to work quickly. Every month, we ingest, index, and process over 100 billion anonymized location records from smartphones and navigation devices in cars and trucks. Our proprietary data processing engine, Road Science, algorithmically transforms these location data points into contextualized, normalized, and aggregated travel patterns. The output is available through our online web platform, StreetLight Insights, and consists of metrics that describe how vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians move. Using StreetLight Insight, transportation professionals can easily analyze mobility patterns for any location in the United States and Canada within minutes. StreetLight supports more than 3,000 analyses each month, such as getting traffic counts, origin destination, route information, trip speed, duration, length, and home and work location metrics. Today, we'll focus on the home and work location metrics. Home and work location metrics describe probable home and work locations for composite group of aggregated travelers based on patterns discerned from trips that start and pass through an analysis area. Our analytics only describe the movement of groups of composite people, not the movement of individuals. There are many applications for home and work locations, and we'll discuss a couple of them today. Teresa will be covering analyzing park visitors, and Matt will be analyzing how to support congestion pricing studies. So right now, I'll pass the spotlight to Teresa to share her experience using home and work locations to analyze the activity at Golden Gate Park.
Thanks, Joanne. So parks overall have become a really important use case for cities and states, primarily because they can be such engines of economic activity, but also because they can have such unique travel behavior dynamics. So just to give an example, here in San Francisco, we have Muir Woods, which is a super popular park. Recently, the Muir Woods Federal Park Association is actually starting to implement a parking permit and shuttle system. And that's because they're experiencing a lot of congestion on the weekends at specific times, and so they're experimenting with trying to figure out a parking permit system and a shuttle system to reduce that congestion and that gridlock. So, you know, this congestion is happening not in the weekdays and not in the AM peak periods when typical congestion conditions occur. So really, really unique travel behavior there. But on the other hand, parks can be so important to the local economy that many cities are trying to understand how local parks are being used and by who. And that's what I'm going to focus on today, is analyzing places like a park with our home and work location analysis tool and deriving important insights from that. So for context, I'll begin with a little background. The SF Park and Rec Department recently broke ground for the tennis court renovation, which has a budget of about $27 million. The tennis court is 125 years old, so lots and lots of people have used it over time, from the legendary Billie Jean King to hometown hero Pinu Louis Harper. Some of the tennis world's biggest stars honed their games on the Golden Gate Park tennis court. So overall, a super important park with a lot of history, and folks were really interested in learning a little bit more about its usage. So one of the questions that the SF Parks Department was grappling with is, we're about to embark on a major renovation. We would love to know who will this benefit and how it will help the local community, as well as who will be impacted by the construction. So they had a couple of key questions that they wanted to see if they could use big data for. One of them was, how many visits are they getting to the tennis court in a year, and then as well as who is visiting this park and using the tennis court facilities specifically. So we went through this process of running analysis for different months to make sure we accounted for seasonal variation and a couple of other factors that folks at the Park and Rec Department were concerned about. And then we ran, like I said, home and work analysis tool, and we had some count data that we then used to calibrate that information to come up with a total number of visits in a year. So one of the interesting findings is that the facilities receive more than 500,000 visits a year. So that's about 600,000 visits to the tennis courts themselves. In addition, part of the analysis also gave us some really interesting insights about who was visiting from where. Based on the home and work neighborhood locations, we were able to determine that 33% of visitors actually came from zip codes neighboring the Golden Gate Park. So lots of locals are using the tennis courts. And then in addition to that, another 20 to 30% of folks are from the immediate city of San Francisco. What was also interesting was when you accounted for the zip codes in the Metro Bay area, 25% of visitors actually come from outside of that metro area. So it's not only a really important facility for locals and residents of the city of San Francisco, but it's also an important facility for people who come and visit from other parts of the country or the world for recreation or for other types of uses. So it's really exciting to see how important this park and these tennis courts specifically are for so many people across the city, the region, and really beyond. I'm going to take a moment now to show you really quickly what an analysis like this looks like in the platform. So what you're looking at is an analysis of home and work locations for people using the tennis court facilities. So you're seeing a heat map of the distribution of home neighborhood locations. And then what you're also seeing is an interesting analysis of how far those home locations are based on those zip codes. So I'm going to pop this up a little bit so you can see more clearly the distribution here. So you can see that, for example, about 50% of folks live less than 3 miles from the tennis court facilities. So about 50% of users or visitors are directly from the immediate community, and the other 50% are either from the metro area, the city, or, like I said, other places across the country in the United States, Canada, or beyond. So thank you for watching this with me. I'm going to now hand it back over to Joanne to talk about some other great applications.
Thank you, Teresa. That is an excellent application. Now, Matt is ready to share with us his personal experience using the home and work locations to support a potential congestion pricing study in Atlanta, where he lived successfully without a car for the last 4 years.
Thanks, Joanne. Hello, everyone. Like Joanne said, I live in Midtown Atlanta, successfully without a car, which has been great. Midtown is a neighborhood that is home to Georgia Tech, 58% of all the jobs that are in Atlanta, and has also experienced 5 times the population growth compared to the rest of the city. So not only is the city rapidly growing, but the region as a whole is the 3rd fastest growing metro in the country. This recent growth has only made traffic worse in the region, especially for those commuting into the city. This recent trend has driven the city and its citizens to think about potential ways to alleviate this congestion. One of our local city council members has recently been quoted saying, "All options need to be on the table to address traffic." It's a real quality of life issue that I'm committed to solving and will use all means to do that. So one of those means that I have been talking about has been congestion pricing, which the city is looking to do a potential study on. With all the pressure from both the public as well as politicians, there's a need to have more information to understand what causes Atlanta to be the 11th most congested city in the US. For instance, we might want to know how much of the congestion is caused by commuters coming from the city or versus those living outside the city. Do commuters have access to public transit? Who would be paying for a potential congestion tax if it was implemented? So in this analysis, I wanted to dive into 2 or 3 questions that could support a potential congestion pricing study. The volume of trips. How many commuters will be impacted? How many people are driving through the Midtown area? Also, who will be impacted? What is the share of local versus non-local traffic in this area? And what are their typical demographics of those people? So I ran an analysis on Spring Street in the Midtown area. Spring Street is one of 5 major arterials that run north-south in Midtown. As you can see on the map, Midtown is a neighborhood that is squeezed between the highway and Piedmont Park. What this allows is that because there are so many businesses and offices in this area, that you have a lot of traffic that are squeezed along these major arterial roads. How much traffic? About 120,000 daily trips on these 5 local roadways going north-south. Spring Street, as I had previously mentioned, is the one on the most westerly side next to the highway. So they experience a lot of commuter traffic coming in and coming out of the city. So we want to know who are the people that are driving on this particular roadway. So what our analysis showed, running our home and work location analysis, was that only 33% of the trips during the AM peak commute time are actually made by those who live in Fulton County, where Atlanta sits. The city of Atlanta only makes up about 50% of Fulton County's population. So one could see how there are a lot of people that are coming from outside both the Atlanta and Fulton County area. Even looking at these outside counties, 33% of the trips are coming from counties such as Cobb County and Gwinnett County, where there's been a lot of arguments about if they should buy into the local transit system or not. So when we're talking about a congestion tax, it's good to know where these commuters are coming from and who would be potentially impacted so that decision makers can have those conversations. Not only do we want to know where these commuters are coming from, but we also want to know who they are. Who would be paying this potential congestion tax? Do they have the type of income that would allow to pay for such a tax, or are people commuting to Atlanta just for minimum wage jobs that they to support themselves? So here we can also understand traveler attributes. of those commuters. So we can see that 26% of the trips that are made during this AM peak on Spring Street are actually made by households with an income less than $35,000 a year. So with this information, the city can go ahead and plan policies that might work better for all sociodemographic groups. With that, I'll turn it back to Joanne for questions.
Thank you, Matt. That is another excellent example how StreetLight could come and help your city make a data-driven policy decision. So let's spend the last few minutes we have with our guest speakers to dig deeper into the home and work analysis and their experience in the field. First question I have for both Teresa and Matt. You have years of experience in the transportation industry. Can you share with our audience and our listener some other methods that they can get home and work location analytics?
I can kick that off. So I think with parks, surveys is probably the main way that people have collected this information in the past. I particularly for parks, I can't imagine doing, for example, like a household travel survey, but I know that historically, the only way to get this type of information is really with surveys. So it's been, and this type of data otherwise has been very difficult to capture. We've all seen, people with clipboards in our lives waiting to ask us a quote-unquote couple of questions when we're hanging out at the park or when we're hanging out at maybe at a mall or something. And really, this is some of the data that they're trying to collect is information about who's coming to this mall or who's coming to this park. And most of us just run away from those types of questions. So it's, historically, one of the bigger challenges with this type of data collection is getting enough sample and getting enough people to answer your questions. So, capturing this type of information historically has definitely been a challenge with some of the other traditional methods.
Right. Yeah, T makes a good point. A lot of these studies would be normally done collecting surveys, and you can see a lot of different levels of surveys. So T was talking about more of an in-person survey. You want to survey the people at a particular location to understand, more about them. Whereas in my example, talking about such a large area, the kind of question is who would you go ahead and sample? So there is a national household travel survey where you're actually able to understand journey to work information. So a very small sample of the population is asked about their typical commuting patterns, so you would be able to understand maybe where people coming from who are commuting into Atlanta. However, this data is it's updated quite infrequent. It does not always have a great sample size, especially if you want to capture a fast-growing dynamic metro environment like Atlanta. I'll also say that another alternative in terms of understanding regional vehicle movements has also been license plate surveys, especially in those states like Georgia, who have the county name tag on those license plates. But those surveys can be quite expensive and probably north of $100,000 at least.
That is a very interesting insight. Different data set and data collection methods definitely bring different benefits and challenges, as we all know. So Teresa and Matt, can you share what are some of the key characteristics that are important for users and for everybody to look at when they're evaluating analytics for use cases you discussed today?
So I would say that what I've heard from folks working in lots of different parks throughout the country and here in San Francisco is that any information on park visitors is definitely super important. Traditionally, it's just been really difficult to get a really solid information on who's visiting a park and the usage. So this is a common question that park and rec people often get from local stakeholders is who is using the parks? And depending on the audience, they want to know whether local folks are benefiting from it or whether it's helping to create livable, vibrant spaces by generating economic activity. So that's always a question these days, particularly in cities, is this or that contributing positively to the community? And so when evaluating data, and analytics for places like parks, the ability to actually answer that part of the question is pretty important.
Yeah, again, implementing policies such as a congestion tax on a city can have widespread implications. So in that example, it's really important to understand the highest amount of the population as possible, so having a very high sample size, and rather not making assumptions or modeling people's patterns and behaviors. So if you're a decision maker, mayor of a city or someone else, they would like to make their decisions with the least amount of uncertainty. So which means having defensible facts and not basing your decisions on assumptions. So at the end of the day, whichever data collection method is chosen, the process needs to be transparent and understood by the stakeholders.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and it's interesting because I want to say that congestion pricing has definitely been something that planners have been thinking about for a really long time. I know in San Francisco, it's something that has been in the books for at least 10 years. And I imagine that some of the difficulties in implementing these types of policies has been the inability to collect this type of information. So I totally second your thoughts on this, Matt.
Definitely.
Fascinating. These are excellent answers by our excellent guest speakers. Unfortunately, we are almost at the end of our session. Again, thank you so much, Teresa and Matt. It has been wonderful and informative to have you both with me here today discussing the home and work location metrics and how we can help transportation professionals out there, doing their everyday job.
Yeah, no, thank you for having us, and it's been great. Looking forward to all those questions out there.
Great, and thank you again for all the listeners who stay tuned until the end. As I promised at the beginning of this webinar, here is Teresa and Matt's contact information if you wish to have a different conversation with them. Check out our support center and join the community forum to learn how others have used StreetLight Insights to solve different transportation problems and learn tips and tricks to leverage in your everyday work. Lastly, a link to blog from Matt's use case, applying home and work location to support a potential congestion pricing study. Thank you again, everyone, and hope you all have a wonderful day.